Hello and welcome to another Melta podcast. With us today is Jan McMaster. He's a business communication consultant and an author based in Munich. Usually during our podcast, we always try to introduce the guest. But today, for a special occasion, I'm going to let our guest tell us more and as much as he wants about himself and about what he is doing in Munich. So, Jan, the mic is yours. Who are you?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to join you here on the podcast. So briefly, I'm from England originally. I mean, my first name, Ian, is actually Scottish. The second name, McMaster, is Irish. My parents were both English. But I've been living here now in Germany, in Munich, for 35 years. So my background is that in England, I studied economics before working as a press officer for a charity. That led me also into the world of journalism. And then since I've been here in Munich, I started off as a teacher. I was doing a lot of business English teaching in Munich and the surrounding area. Also some translation work, but increasingly writing as a freelance journalist. And then in 1992, I joined Spotlight Verlag, so Spotlight Publishing House, as an editor on their general English magazine, Spotlight. And I went on to work at the company there for nearly 30 years. The company is now called Zeitsprachen because it's a subsidiary of Die Zeit in Hamburg. And I spent my last 20 years there as editor-in-chief of the Business English or Business Communication magazine, Business Spotlight, from where I retired nearly 3 years ago. And since then, I've been working, doing bits and pieces of freelance editing, writing, consulting, also keeping in touch with the business English community via attending conferences in various countries in Europe.
That's nice. Now, if I would like to start with one question, which is taken from the biography at the end of the book. For some people who don't know, for some people who are new to business teaching, what is actually the difference between business communication consultant and business communication teacher? I always see that there's the teacher and there's the consultant. What are the main differences between the two terms?
Yeah, sure. Actually, let me just say one other thing that I forgot to mention before is that I've been involved with MELTA, the Munich English Language Teachers Association, since the 1990s. So that goes back 30 years. And I'm a huge fan of the so-called ELTAs, the teachers' organizations around Germany. But I mean, it's a good question you ask. I mean, people use all sorts of different terminology. I mean, people talk, typically when people start teaching, they call themselves a teacher as the obvious thing. And then quite often they move into calling themselves a business English trainer. Other people then move on to more into the coaching area. Consultant is a very vague term. It simply means that you work in various areas relating to communication. So that could be editorial type work, it could be consulting type work, it could be teacher training type work. It's just, to be honest, it's a term that means everything and nothing. As a lot of terms do.
Okay. So, being in Germany, you know that in Germany, especially in Munich, there are a lot of, let's say, a lot of people from different cultural background, and sometimes when we teach, you know that in one class could be 10 people from 10 different countries. It's not the same as like in England or some other countries. Based on your experience, what are the differences between working with an international team and working in the same country where the majority, if not all, members of the team belong to the same culture or the same background? What are the similarities, if there are any, and the differences?
Yeah, it's interesting. If I can just pick up on 3 terms that you mentioned there. You mentioned the term country, as in people coming from the same country. You mentioned the term culture, people coming from the same culture. And you also mentioned people having the same background. And this is interesting because in a way, they're kind of related but different things. So quite often when we hear people talk about culture, we're still trapped, even though we've been talking about this for decades, we're still trapped in this idea that culture equals country in some way. So, for example, recently somebody told me they had a homogenous group of students, and I said, "What do you mean by homogenous? They're different people. How can they be homogenous?" And of course, people are different. So in a way, I prefer to think of culture as an individual thing, not as a country thing, um, because and every individual has their individual background. They bring with them attitudes, values, experience, which is related on a whole range of things, one of which is the country that they come from. And that could be an important influence in certain situations, but lots of other, their family background, their maybe religion in their family, maybe politics, maybe class, then gender, then we've got age. Then when you move into the world of work, you've got people from different professions, in different departments, different levels of the hierarchy. And all these aspects influence the person's individual culture. So I prefer to see culture as an individual thing. And when we talk about teams, prefer in a way to encourage teams to spend more time thinking, what culture are they going to create for their team as a common way of working, rather than focusing on sort of looking back and focusing on people's country or other backgrounds. So in a way, the short answer to your question, that was the long answer. The short answer is you've always got groups which are varied, and you need to take account of that and not get hung up on factors like, for example, country background, because you're very quickly in danger of heading into the area of stereotypes, of stereotyping people on the basis of certain characteristics.
Now, just follow-up question. A lot of people who try to take up teaching complain that it's important and essential when they apply to a position. They always say, if we cannot accept you unless you are or you have lived in a certain or a specific place or a country. I'm talking as a teacher. Now, do you think the employer in this case had the right or is somehow right, or is just a reason to say no, because it's, as we all know today, it's a term of native speakerism.
Yeah, I mean, native speakerism, in this context refers to the idea that somebody who is a native speaker, which whatever that means, and it's not always clear in lots of contexts, has some kind of advantage or superiority when it comes to teaching a particular language. That's kind of the issue we're talking about here. And it's quite clear to me that no, I mean, employers should not be discriminating against people on that ground, or even in favor of people on that ground. Even if, as say, you can determine, because lots of people grow up with different languages, not simply just one. But no, this has been a big topic within the industry recently. There's also been legal challenges to this idea, particularly the work of Patrick Mustu in Germany. Employers should be employing the people who are the best people to do the job, and that will be based on their skills, their experience, their attitudes, and so on. It won't be based on what country they come from, or what country they've worked in, or what language they were born with, let's say, or they learnt as their first language. So we're slowly moving away from this form of discrimination, but it is slow, and you will still see, for example, job adverts that ask for native speakers of a language. That shouldn't happen anymore.
So you think it's good for teaching when you have different people from different backgrounds? Do you think they add good value to the teaching by using different working styles if they
You
come
mean
from different backgrounds?
you mean a range of different teachers?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in principle, diversity should be a good thing in most cases. But what you're looking for is the best teachers. If I was setting up a training organization as language school, I would want the best teachers, the best trainers. I wouldn't be judging on irrelevant criteria. I'd be looking at what have they done, what skills do they have, What do people say about them in the past? Are they team members? And if you've got people with a variety of different approaches, yeah, then I'm sure that adds something to it, definitely.
Okay, and that takes us to another question. Do you think there are important different working styles in teaching?
Yeah, and again, I'd like to bring it back to the individual level. So, for example, you could have a team where, let's say you've got a team of 6 people, just as an example. They could all come from the same country, or at least they could have all been born in the same country. But they're going to have different individual attitudes. They're going to have different working styles. I mean, I know this from working with people. They will have different, for example, attitudes to things like how much information do they want to receive about particular topics? How do they go about making decisions? And I'll give you an example. When I was working at the publisher, and we had a staff meeting, and I said to the team, we talked about a topic, and then I just said to them, what are your instant reactions? And some people instantly started talking, and one person said, I don't have instant reactions. I'll tell you tomorrow. You see, so what we're looking at is individual people, and people have individual preferences. Some like to do everything at the last minute. Some are very organized and want to get everything done in advance because they don't want that pressure. Some want to take quick decisions. Some wants to study all the information. Some want to re-look at a decision again once it's been made. For other people, that's annoying. They think a decision's been taken. Why are we talking about it again? We decided this yesterday. So all these factors, and also how people like to communicate. I mean, some people, like to communicate more face-to-face. Others prefer remote communication, whether it's written through email or messages. Other people prefer to talk on the phone. So you've inevitably got a range of working styles in whatever team you've got and whatever the background of those people. And the question is, how, as a team, are you going to somehow mold those different working styles, ideally to get benefit out of them, but at least at the minimum to avoid conflict and confusion by the fact that people prefer doing things in different ways. So that's what I meant earlier when I said that teams need to spend more time thinking, how are we going to work together? What is our team culture? How are we going to take decisions? How much information are we going to require before we have a decision? Is a decision final? What's our attitude to deadlines? Are they fixed, or is there flexibility? And all these things create things that teams ideally should discuss before there's a breakdown in communication. Typically, these things are looked at after there's a crisis situation, when something has gone wrong. Then teams have a kind of panic meeting. Maybe they bring in an outsider to help them because they haven't thought about these things enough in advance. Even within teams that are allegedly homogenous, but I say I don't believe there are homogenous teams, and I don't really believe there are national teams anymore. Most people, there's some international element, which just doesn't mean there's a difference in kind. It just means a difference maybe in degree of the amount of variety. So yeah, working with and molding and combining different working styles or preferences is very important for good teamwork.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, today the world is becoming, a bit crazier than it used to be, and people are somehow more sensitive. They're becoming more sensitive, discussing some certain topics. Now, do you think that poor language skills often lead or are the cause of misunderstandings and conflicts?
I think poor communication skills are the source of misunderstandings and conflict. And I think I often say, as a half joke, I ask people, I say to them, are you, as an individual, are you a WTCP? And they look at me because they've got no idea what a WTCP is. And there's no reason why they should, because I made it up. It's not a common term. But what I mean by a WTCP is And I say, well, you all are that, all of you, whether you put your hand up or not. And that is a walking, talking communication problem. In other words, human beings we go around the world in our interactions with friends, family, colleagues, strangers. We go around causing misunderstanding the whole time. And therefore, the misunderstandings come because of our poor communication skills. Now, it could be that language is a factor within that, obviously. It could be because somebody's language is not good enough, in inverted commas, or maybe a high enough level, or they don't know enough words to express themselves, or they say something unintentional in a second language, but it also happens in the first language. So, but a lot of the times it's not that people don't have sufficient language skills, it's that they don't have sufficient communication skills. So they're not using the language that they have clearly enough. What do I mean by that? I mean that when they speak themselves, they're not thinking consciously whether they are expressing themselves clearly. They're not checking whether other people have understood what they've said. And when they're listening, hopefully they are listening to other people, again, they're not clarifying what the other person has said. They're not asking questions. Often what we have is sort of parallel monologues where one person talks and the other person talks, and maybe not even parallel, maybe they're overlapping or at the same time. And that the people are not actually taking enough time to try to understand what is it the other person's really saying. If there is a misunderstanding, to try to clear it up, or if somebody had said something that maybe you take offense at what somebody said, well, maybe they didn't say that at all, or maybe they didn't mean what you think they mean. So it's a lot of work has to go into clarification in communication. Of course, we don't do this most of the time because we don't take the time, and because if we did take the time, life would become almost impossible. For example, if a colleague says to you, would you like a cup of tea? And you say to your colleague, what do you mean by cup? Yeah, because you've decided to clarify everything that you hear, then obviously life's going to get pretty tedious. But in more important examples, it really is essential to try to understand, have I understood what the other person has said and why they're saying it? And when you're speaking, have they understood what you're saying and why you're saying it? And rather than looking or being very open to being offended or upset by what somebody said, another important point is to look for the positive intention in other people's messages, because the intention is more positive than we interpret. So to bring that back to your question, yes, of course, language can play a role in misunderstandings, but it's actually even between, or particularly between people who share a language, the misunderstandings are there without the language problem. So it's not the language per se, which is often the cause of the problem.
Coming to your book, you sent it to me, and before I ask you about your book, it just felt interesting, and it's itchy to ask you, why did you decide to have the cover and the first few pages in German, and then the rest of the book, the whole book was in English? Before you tell me about the book and uh, anything you would like to say about that, where from did that idea come, and why? Why did you decide to do that?
No, it's a very good question. I'm glad you asked it, because I would have had to explain it anyway. And like a lot of things in life, it's the result of a series of decisions that ends up with a result that might seem illogical, but has a certain logic to it. So very briefly, the publisher of our book that I wrote with Bob Dignan, who is my long-standing collaborator in all things business English. We've written a number of books together, articles, and Bob was for 20 years wrote a section on business skills in Business Spotlight magazine. The publisher of the book is Haufer, which is a big German publisher. Their market is the German-speaking market. And very originally, the book they wanted was going to be in German. The whole book's going to be in German. But we decided during the production or the process of developing the idea of the book, we decided to that actually the book should be in English because it's about English. But because Halfa target market is the German-speaking market, and their books typically then have a German cover title and cover, that was left as it was because it was regarded as good for the German market. Now, obviously, I understand at the same time that for some people that's caused confusion because if you look at the book and you see the title, which is Trainingsbuch Business English, Kommunikation und Zusammenarbeit in internationalen Teams, that's clearly in German, but the whole of the book is, as you said, in English. I mean, ironically, most of those words in the title of the book are actually identical in English. So you could actually argue whether the title of the book is in English or German. It's because apart from the word Zusammenarbeit, which, you know, working together or collaboration, every other word on the title is identical in English. So that is the answer to your question. But I should say that we are in discussions with also having the possibility of having a second version where the cover is also in English, because for the international market, with people who have no contact to Germany or the German language, that would make more sense. Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. It does. Well, except for the preposition and the ending in internationalen. Something we
Yeah,
learned in
exactly,
in
exactly.
German.
Yeah,
In
yeah.
Germany, yeah. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for explaining the title, the German title of the
Hmm.
English book.
Yeah.
If I ask you, I can simply ask you the normal question. Can you please tell us about your book? Or I can ask you, why did you decide to write that that book? And who is your audience? I know there is a section to whom
Mm.
that book is, but
Mm.
let's say for the people who are listening to us or who are watching us, why did you decide to write that book? And just give us some general ideas about its content and who is the audience?
Yeah.
Who's supposed to read that book?
Yeah, good question. I mean, your first question, why did I, or together with Bob Dignan, decide to write this book? I mean, the simple answer to that is that we didn't. We didn't decide to write it. We were approached by the publisher, Halfa, who wanted to have a new business English title in their portfolio and came to us. And we thought, okay, what can we do that reflects our view of business English or business communication, maybe more generally, compared to, say, a book that would have been written 20 years ago. And Halfa had one that was written 20 or nearly 30 years ago. It was very good. But what can we do that's different from that? Apart from the fact it has a red cover and the other one has a blue cover. And the big difference is that whereas in the past, business English was often divided up into what was sometimes called the big six. And the big six were sort of big six typical events or situations where people need English at work. And maybe I should clarify, when I say business English, what I mean by business English is nothing to do with managerial or finance or anything like that. What I mean is the English people need to do their jobs at work. So in a way, the term English at work or workplace English is actually a better description than business English, because business English, for some people, makes them think it's for a select group of people. I'm talking about the English for anybody at work. Now, traditionally, as I said, the business English was divided into the big six. And what were the big six? The big six were, you need English at work for the following: telephoning. I mean, we laugh a little bit now, but that was seen as a very big thing. Telephoning, writing, giving presentations, taking part in meetings, negotiating, and the other one was socializing and small talk. And these were almost seen as like six separate areas, and there were, you know, separate books brought out by the publishers on these six areas. And in each area, you were given the language that you needed to, for example, open a meeting, agree and disagree in a meeting, make decisions, etc., etc. And the approach that Bob and I have taken for years, and we take in this book primarily, is to say, what are the generic communication skills that you need at work, regardless of what the situation is in which you're using language? So it doesn't matter in a way whether it's a presentation or a meeting or a negotiation or relationship building via or socializing and small talk. You have to do the following things. You have to create rapport and contact with people. You have to be able to persuade people. You have to be able to take decisions. You have to be able to resolve conflicts. You have to be able to support people. You have to be able to give and receive feedback. And these are generic skills that go across all the previous big 6 dimensions. So in a way, we're looking at the concept of business English differently. And then we said, okay, well, what is one of the most common sort of umbrella terms, or if you like, what holds this all together in people's work nowadays? And it's the fact that everybody at work works in teams of some sort. So whereas the other approach, the traditional approach, saw the person on their own, I'm giving a presentation, I'm negotiating with maybe one other person in a meeting, you know, it was quite individualized. We're saying actually most of what you do at work involves teamwork. And a team for me is anything more than one person. So you're working with somebody else, you're working in a team of 4 or 6 or 10 or whatever. And therefore, that's why we called it teamwork. International, because to be honest, the world of work is international almost wherever you go. Everybody is working either almost everybody is working in contact with somebody from a different place, a different, they may be in a different country, they may be from a different country, they may just have a different background. So that's why we base these generic communication skills around teamwork, because that's in a sense what holds working life together, is teamwork. And from there, it was quite a small step to say, okay, what are 20 key areas, things that people need to do in teamwork, from the first stage of forming a team, through developing a team culture, through working together, dealing with problems that come up, leading teams, and making your team work more effective. And that's how the book is broken down into these areas.
Okay, thank you. What if someone is interested in reading that book? How can they reach you? Is it only PDF, or you also have the printed version? How can we get that book?
No, the book, it is a book, so it's primarily, it exists as a physical book. In fact, maybe just quickly I can just show you, or show people. If I take that background off, you can see here, this is the book. It's a physical book. And in fact, most people still go for the physical copy, but it's also available as a PDF version. And whether you have the, this is quite a nice thing for teachers, is that within the book there is a code, also within the PDF version. And with this code, you can go online onto the website of the publisher, Halfa. And when you go online, you'll come into a little area about the book, and various elements in the book you will then find in separate little Word files. I'll tell you what I mean by this. Each chapter in the book has certain key elements. It has a little case study for people to think about, what we call a critical incident. It has feedback on that critical incident. It has useful phrase, it has exercises. Now, for teachers, this is very useful in teaching, because you know, rather than say, you know, like copying things out of a book, or maybe in a book a certain element goes over 2 pages, here all these crucial little elements are available in separate Word files on 1 page. It makes them much easier to use. In the book, it's called digital extras. So yes, it's a book, it's a PDF. You can buy it. The book is available through all the normal online bookshops, but it's also available, which is probably most interesting or good for people who speak German. It's available via the website of the publisher themselves, so via Halfa's own website. And the publisher likes people buying it there, because if they buy it there, the whole of the price of the book goes to the publisher, whereas if you buy it via an online bookshop whose name begins with A, for example, then half of the money goes to that online bookshop and only half of it goes to the publisher. So, but obviously for people that don't speak German and don't want to fight their way through a German language website, you can just use your normal, whatever normal online bookstore that you order from.
Okay, I'll go to the main website of Halfor and maybe leave a link in the description for those
Yeah,
who are interested. I think today
yeah. There's
anyone can
there's a
use,
link.
yeah, they can use the automatic translator if they don't speak German. Yeah, or they
Yeah.
have some extra money, they can go to that website which you mentioned and get it. Okay, so thank you very much for explaining that. Now, I'd like to ask about a term which a lot of people nowadays are using, which is the AI. Now, before I ask you how we can use it to help us as teachers or to help the students, um, do you think the artificial intelligence is a handy way in our job as teacher? Do you think it really helps, or as some people say, it makes us lazy teachers because it does the whole job for us?
Well, it shouldn't make teachers lazy, and I don't believe it will. Certainly not good teachers. And I think the the interesting question is obviously how do you use this tool? Yeah, and when we say this tool, when we say AI, um, I mean AI is such a broad topic. It covers so many different aspects and so many different applications that it's hard to talk about it in a kind of global way that is sensible and covers everything. So, you know, but to take an example, a very practical example of what you might be referring to, I mean, AI, quite a lot of teachers now are using AI to help them produce materials for their classes. So we bring it down from a kind of a sort of a meta level where we're talking about, what's the impact on AI on the human race and, and ethical issues and all these kind of things. Bring it down to a very practical level. With certain AI tools, you can create language exercises, for example. Now, I was talking to a very experienced business English teacher about this a week ago, and he said, look, the tool is there, but the difference between how an inexperienced teacher or trainer is going to use that tool and how an experienced trainer is going to use it is what's going to make all the difference. So, he works in a very particular area, the paper industry, and he's got decades of experience working in that industry. And therefore, if he wants to create exercises for his students at a particular level, then he knows, because he knows those students and he knows the terminology they're going to need and the types of phrases. He knows what types of exercises they need. Whereas somebody who's inexperienced might just say to, ChatGPT or whatever tool it is, produce me some exercises for beginners in the paper industry. And the technology will do that. The technology, is not going to ask you an awful lot of questions about exactly who your students are, what stage they're at. You're going to have to feed that information in your questions and your prompts. So the inexperienced user will get exercises, but they may be of no use whatsoever to the students because the teacher trainer doesn't have that experience themselves to know what's relevant and also maybe to also correct things which are wrong or whatever. So, the point is not the tool itself, it's how we use it and how teachers use it. And I've been to a lot of talks at conferences and webinars recently about this, and at the one level it's mind-blowing, just all the things that the technology can do, and particularly how quickly it can do it. But we're still in a phase where it's happening very quickly. Technological developments are very fast. Teachers and trainers are learning about it. Maybe what we learn is out of date a month later, but we're all, trying to grapple with this. Most of us are not AI experts. We just want to see, is there some way this could help me in my teaching? So again, to come back to your question, it shouldn't make people lazy. If it does, they're using the tool in the wrong way. if it saves them time and allows them to invest that time in more productive uses, why would we, why would we insist on teachers, trainers, or anybody else using an old-fashioned technology that takes them, we don't say to teachers, you have to write everything out by hand or with a quill or something. We use the technologies there, and I see AI in this narrow sense as no different to, a typewriter or some other, a pen compared to a quill and parchment, a long time ago.
So don't you think that by using that, especially for teachers when they are preparing for their lessons, uh, do you think that one day we'll no longer need any trainings for teachers or any, for example, we have the CELTA and Delta and other trainings. Do you think we'll reach a day when a potential teacher would ask himself why to make this extra effort since I can simply write few lines in ChatGPT and I have the plan, I take it to the classroom, and here we go. What do you think? Do you agree with me?
No, I mean it's an interesting question, and again, a lot of the webinars and talks at conferences, some concern the use of the particular tools, and others concern the issue you're talking about, which is in a sense the impact of AI on the teaching profession. So to go back a step, at a very general level, if the question is, should I get qualified or should I not get qualified, then I still think we're definitely in the phase of yes, you should be qualified. I mean, but that's not just about teachers, that's about engineers, that's about doctors, that's about every other nurses, that's about every other job. So, being qualified, assuming the qualification is a good and relevant one, and is a good thing in my view. And one of the problems in the teaching profession is that because there is no, there is no essential recognized qualifications in the same way there is for accountants, lawyers, doctors, and various other professions. That's one of the reasons why teachers are so badly paid, because anybody can come in and do it. So, I mean, generally, I'm in favor of qualifications, but those qualifications are going to have to adapt over time to take account of the technology. So when I did my teaching certificate or my, like the CELTA in 1990, yes, we probably spent a lot of time thinking about how to create exercises. We also spent a lot of time doing it. Now, well, if the technology can save us time there, we can spend more time on other aspects of teaching, or teachers in other roles as coaches, as moderators, or as motivators, and let the technology do the drudge work. This would be the ideal situation. So this technology, like others, will have an impact on the profession, but the thing is to try to steer that impact in a way that helps teachers and the profession to become more professional and not less professional. At the same time, obviously, there will be, and we've seen that already, there'll be lots of new alternatives. There already are lots of technologically driven alternatives to learning languages where you don't need a teacher. So a lot of people, like myself, use tools like, I mean, just to mention two, Duolingo or Babbel or whatever it is, just as a form of self-study in the same way they use the products of the company that I used to work for, Spotlight Verlag or Zeitsprachen, with their magazines, audio, websites, podcasts, etc. So self-study will always be there, and a certain sector of the market will be looking for guidance from teachers and trainers. And it's up to teachers and trainers to mold that role and implement and integrate the technology in a way that ensures that they still have relevance. And if they have relevance, they will be employed to carry out those tasks.
Okay, thank you. You said something about self-study, like using some applications like Duolingo, and actually that's the source of 90% of my German in Germany. One of my colleagues said that self-study is only good for those who studied the language at university. I'm not talking about only English. German, Spanish, Italian, any other language. And she said that only people who study the language as university, as a higher education, believe that self-study is more beneficial than actually participating in a course or studying with another teacher. And if for some reason these people become teachers, they insist on their students uh, that they must, let's say, work themselves, work harder on getting the information rather than the teacher giving them the information. Do you agree with that, or you think it doesn't matter? It's about each person. It's not about studying the language as a higher education or not.
Um, my instinct is it's a very individual thing. I mean, there are all sorts of different ways of learning a language, aren't there? I mean, they're composed of, you could break it down into certain big areas. One is self-study. That covers a multitude of different things that can be using all sorts of medium, of which these newer ones, technology-driven ones, are only the latest incarnation. I'm not sort of singing the praises of any of these methods. I'm just saying that if you're a self-study learner, if you want to try to learn a language, there are a whole range of tools available for you, much more than there used to be, so that you can do that, whether you want to read, whether you want to learn vocabulary, grammar, whether you want to practice your listening skills. The self-study things tend to be a bit weaker on the speaking side at the moment, but that will develop as technology develops. So that's one area, what in a sense self-study. Another whole area is some form of guided instruction. So some taking part in some kind of class, if you want to use that word. Now, again, that can be face-to-face, that can be online, it can be hybrid. It can involve blended learning. And within that, you've got a whole range of different methods that people use, from very traditional frontal teaching type methods to more collaborative or methods, which maybe is what you meant, where the more emphasis put on the students, even within that class context, to actually do things for themselves. And then you've got maybe a third area, which is and of course, courses can be intensive or they can be extensive over a long time, or very compact. And the third area, as well as self-study and course, the third dimension maybe is, which can combine elements of both of those, is actually, being in the country where this language is spoken, and therefore immersing yourself in the whole experience. Now, if I was starting from scratch now and wanted to learn a new language, which in some ways I am, because I've just started to learn Italian, which I've never done before, I would want to do all of those things, ideally, time permitting. I would be trying out all sorts of self-study things. I'd maybe sign up for an intensive course somewhere. I'd go and spend some time in the country where the language is spoken. I would be, in a sense, bombarding myself with all these inputs. I'd also be trying to work out what works for me, because, and I don't mean work in a sort of some kind of pedagogical sense, because as a learner, I may not even be able to judge that. What motivates me, because my conviction is there's basically only one reason why people fail to learn a language. Well, there might be two. One might be time, but that's often, we normally find time to do things we really want to do. But the big reason why people fail is not it's some innate linguistic ability or skills, it's motivation. And the reason they don't learn the language is because they stop at some point. They start maybe enthusiastically and then they stop. And the reason they stop is mainly to do with motivation. They're not enjoying it. They don't feel they're making progress. So whether it's a class situation or whether it's a self-study tool, whether it's a technology-driven tool, if you don't feel motivated and feel you're making progress, then you're probably going to stop at some point. So I don't see it in these kind of, this sort of categorical terms that maybe was presented in your question. I think it's an individual thing. I think it's a complicated thing, but I think at the heart of it is motivation. Why do I want to learn this? Do I really want to learn it? And are the tools and the methods that I'm using, are they motivating for me or not? And that's irrelevant of what they are. If I really wanted to learn a language quickly, though, then I would have to go, I think I would have to go for an extensive, immersive period of going and spending 6 months in a country. That's actually how I learned German ultimately, was by being here and being surrounded by it and having classes and doing self-study. But I mean, I don't want to generalize from my experience to everybody else, but I think I disagree with the premise of your question, if we can all both remember what it was, about the higher education. It sounds too black and white to me.
Well, actually, I agree with you, and actually that's how I learned English. Started learning English by myself before the social media, before the internet.
Yeah,
And maybe because
yeah.
my colleague knew that about me, so maybe she came up with that conclusion with which you know I can't agree or disagree because just like you, I do believe that each person is different.
Mm,
So
mm.
uh, I would I would take your point because it sounds more logical, actually.
I mean, what
Okay.
interests me with these you know, apps or technology and tools is, and I have a friend who's been using one for 2 years now, or 3 years, every day. And he told me that he can now, for Spanish, and he can now have conversations in Spanish with his partner. And I think that's the interesting thing is for learners, how do they make the transition between doing these daily activities with apps to actually using the language effectively in a communication context? How that transition works, I don't know. Maybe I'll find out myself at some point if I stick with it.
Well, let's go for it. Okay. Do you have some, let's say, a piece of advice for the young people in Germany, exactly in Germany, who want to become teachers? Um, what would you tell them? Go for it, find your way. Here's my book that can help you. The future is bright for you. Or you tell them, if you are into teaching, Germany is not the best place for you. What advice would you give the young people in Germany who want to take up teaching?
Well, why would Germany not be a good place? I mean, it's as good a place as it's as good a place as any. I mean, the question is, do you want to become a teacher? And if you're not sure, I mean, my advice to anybody who's serious about becoming a teacher and maybe moving on to, you know, teaching English or then teaching maybe English work, business English, is would be, if you're serious about it, get qualified, do the qualification. If you're not sure about it, then try it out first to see. I mean, ideally, I think language organizations should be only taking on qualified teachers. On the other hand, as a teacher, it can be an advantage for you if you're not qualified to actually get some experience, which you can do in some places, just to see whether you like it or not before you make that investment in the you know, in the qualification. Because to do a CELTA, I mean, if you do it full time, it's a month, and it's, you know, it can be quite expensive. It's an investment in your future, which I think is a good investment, a very good investment if you're serious about it. But you might also actually, ironically, get more out of the course if you've already had some teaching experience. I didn't have any for teaching English. I went and did my qualification, and then I came back and tried to put some of these things into practice. And in a way, I realized I would have got possibly even more out of the course if I'd had some experience beforehand. But, you know, it's that vicious circle of, you know, how do you get, you know, how do you get started when you have no experience? But there are opportunities. You know, you have to sell yourself, convince people. I know from when I came over here, I was told by all the people I approached, we will only take you on if you have a qualification. So that was my motivation to go and get a qualification. At the same time, I'm aware there are quite a lot of teachers who are working without qualifications, and there are still language schools who will take them on. And if that's the case, then take advantage of that as a teacher. As far as the specific German market goes, I mean, there are opportunities here, but I mean, the question is really, you know, the first question should be, well, do you want to live in Germany? If you want to live in Germany, then go for it here. If you have other reasons why you don't want to live here, then fine. But I wouldn't make the teaching, the teaching world the basis of your choice. Unless you simply don't find anything here, then sure, you might have to go elsewhere. But I mean, Germany is a mature market in some ways. It's not a rapidly growing market as the other parts of the world are. That's definitely true. It's a matured market which doesn't have, as far as I'm aware, or my experience of talking to people, it does not have rapid growth in English or business English at the moment. It does in certain areas, but in general, it's not a fast, rapidly growing market. And that's partly because to do with the level of English skills amongst people coming out of German schools, much higher than it was 30 years ago. People maybe don't see the need for extra training. But when I talk to people, some teachers in training, their markets are booming because they have clients who have a lot of employees that need training. In other areas, the demand is falling, but there are other parts of the world, I'm sure, where the market for English is growing more rapidly. On the other hand, the pay and conditions may or may not be as good as they are here, depending on where you're working.
Okay,
Go for it.
thank you.
Go for it.
Yeah, Jan McMaster, thank you very much for joining us today. It was very nice and pleasant to talk to you and to get to know you more and more about your book.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Okay, so dear listeners and viewers of the Meta podcast, I'm going to leave a link for Jan's book in the description. If you're interested, you can follow the link. You can also buy it directly from the publisher. If for some reasons you can't get there, you can always find it in. We are not advertising here, but I'm sure, as Jan said, the first letter is A, which is the name of a famous river in South America. We are not advertising. Okay. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much for watching, for liking, for commenting. We're going to find this podcast in two versions, the video version and the audio version. So thank you very much and see you later in another Melta podcast.